people in marketing may have a very different perspective than someone in engineering or finance about what's ethical. So what I figured out is that by listening to a number of different people's perspectives on a particular ethical situation, I learn a lot.
I love to hear about, you have such a quite interesting career journey from being a prosecutor to, eventually working at multiple really successful big tech companies like eBay, Chegg, or Airbnb. So I want to hear, let's go back to early on in your career. Why did you decide to study law and how did you grow up? Like what kind of environment that made you decided to become a prosecutor and eventually go on this path?
I think I was always interested in government. Just out of a desire to make a difference in the world. And I think I grew up with this sort of idealistic notion that the government was the best place to do it. And that, the companies were more, they're just out to make money. Government is where you can make a difference. And I think, I went to law school and I got involved a little bit in politics and immediately kind of saw the negative side of politics and became a little disillusioned with the idea of running for office. Being a prosecutor was a great way to get practical experience. They're actually crazy enough to give you a file and let you stand up on your feet and try a case. Whereas if you go to a private law firm, you might be years and years before you get to do something like that. So I thought of being a prosecutor as a way to contribute to society. But I'll tell you, even that, putting young people in jail was tough. I didn't enjoy that aspect. The job got to be pretty negative after a while. And I gradually came around to the idea that you could do a lot of good in the world working for a company, maybe even more so than in the government. And that's, I think, what sort of led me to move away from the prosecutor world and get involved in the private sector.
So can you tell us more about, you transitioned yourself from a prosecutor to eBay, and tell us about that journey. Like, what is the difference between practicing law you're still practicing law in eBay, but, what's the difference and what surprised you back then?
It was really different. And in fact, the challenge was making the move because, most people don't go from being a prosecutor to working in-house at a company. Just because companies don't need prosecutors. I looked around for a job for a while and it's like, wow, great resume. You're a great prosecutor. We don't need a prosecutor. But one night I was using eBay and I really was an early user of eBay and thought it was a fantastic company. And it struck me one night that, they've got fraud, they've got illegal items, they've got all these regulatory challenges. Somebody with my background could really help them. So I went onto their website. To be honest, I did not know. I had never been to San Jose, California. I wasn't really quite sure exactly where it was in California, but I was in Virginia. I figured California, anywhere in California was pretty good. So I sent them my resume. They didn't have any job openings, but I sent it to jobs@ebay.com and thought I'd never hear from them, right? I get home the next day and there's a voice message from them, and 2 weeks later, I'm having dinner with Meg Whitman out in California. And it was a small company. It was only 170 people when I joined. But it was great. I really got an opportunity to make a big impact. And that was pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's quite an interesting story. I like that you just I'm the user and then applying a job just online. I feel like it's so refreshing to hear nowadays since everything.
It's a great way to actually find a company to work for. You ought to believe in what you do. You ought to feel like it's something that resonates with you. And what eBay was doing really resonated with me. It was connecting people over common interest, people from all over the country and all over the world. People forget eBay was probably one of the 4 big internet companies. People think of the current big 4, but 15, 20 years ago, it was AOL, eBay, Yahoo, and Amazon. Back then, eBay was really making a huge difference in the world. It was cool to be part of.
since you were a prosecutor and then you can technically join a lot of different firms like finance firms or like something that's like really mainstream back then. Curious, like, what made you decided to jump like into a, 100 people company in Silicon Valley that you don't really know where it is kind of situation?
Yeah, I was, I really thought the internet was pretty cool. And by the way, back then that was not such a normal thing.
Yeah.
I remember when I was in Northern Virginia, people kept sending me, prosecutors kept calling, and they kept saying they wanted records from this little company in Northern Virginia, and they wanted to prosecute this company. I'm like, what is this company? And the company was AOL, but I didn't know what AOL was. But because all these other prosecutors kept asking me questions about it, I figured, yeah, I've read about this internet thing. Maybe I should look into it a little more, just for work. And that's when I got back then they had these discs, and you stuck the disc in your computer and you plugged your phone into the back. And so that was the journey. And I really, when I went on that journey of learning, by the way, I think that's really key for people, is to have a learning mindset, have a curious mindset. I think that was, if anybody asked me to credit, how I've grown in my career, I think it's being open to new things.
Absolutely.
And I was just open to learning about the internet, and it was something that once I started using it, it really like, wow, this is going to make it. This is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that's I love that, like, you're just being curious. And going back to the career development side, so you've participating in a lot of like huge changes around the internet, and just curious, what are maybe 3 skills that you feel like you have to learn at your job that make you more successful? And what would be like maybe 3 characteristics that you have that make you more successful than your peers?
Yeah, I mean, curiosity is definitely one. When I look at people that I admire that I think have been successful, that continuous learning mindset. You don't have to be the smartest person, but as long as you are open to learning and curious. Look, the world's moving too fast. In the old days, you go to college, you get 4 years, you go out and you go to work for a company, and then you're set for 40 years. Today, the world's moving so fast, you've got to constantly be learning all along just to keep up with what the world needs. So I think, number 1 would be curiosity. Number 2, I think you need to be Adam Grant writes, he's got a book called Give and Take. And I think you've got to be a bit of a giver. I think you've got to approach the world with, what can I do for you? And when you do that, Adam Grant's book talks about how the world gives back to you. People that give actually end up being more financially successful than people that are always taking. So I think it's a mindset around, it's not a zero-sum game in the world. It's not, I'm going to, there's a limited pie here and I'm going to get as much of the pie as I can. It's more that there's an unlimited pie and I want to make sure you get some of it. And I think in the process, whether it's a karma thing or it's people will start rooting for you and want you to be successful too. So I think having a giving mindset would be, number 2. So I think you've got curiosity, you've got sort of a giving mindset. I think being open to feedback would be number 3. eBay was built on feedback, and I've over my career I've come to learn that feedback is something that a lot of people are naturally very defensive about, and I think a key is flipping that. Feedback is a gift. So you have to learn that the more people are comfortable in giving you feedback and telling you what you can do better, the more you're going to have an opportunity to learn and grow. And if you make people comfortable to give you feedback, then you'll get more of it. And then people start to root for you when you've got some self-awareness around, oh, maybe you've got a point. So maybe that's cheating, and maybe I've given you 4 by adding self-awareness in there, but I'll stick with that.
So in terms of like receiving feedbacks, what would be a piece of feedback that you've heard that's like really useful for your life in the past? And what is a good feedback to take? So I feel like a lot of people could tell you what to do. For example, in your like at eBay situation, a lot of people were saying, oh, this is illegal, your company is destined to fail or whatever. How do you kind of recognize what would be a feedback that I'm choosing to take some action on to improve than, just like receiving feedback from all over the place that you may not even, keep running your platform anymore?
For me personally, I think particularly early in my career, I needed to listen more. I think early in my career, I had a lot of success by being an individual contributor. And I got a little bit into the mindset of I know how to do things and just I'm going to grab it and take it and do it. And I got some good feedback around, I need to sit back, I need to listen, I need to empower other people. And I have to get into a mindset that there's not a right way or a wrong, or right answer to things. We all bring our own unique perspectives to work. And they're all biased by our experience and our background. And if I walk into a room and everybody looks like me, we're probably not going to come to the right answer because we've got similar backgrounds and experiences, and we're going to miss things. So, I mean, look at the issue of discrimination at Airbnb. When there were reports that guests were being discriminated against based on the color of their skin, the reaction inside of Airbnb was shock and surprise. Now, when you think about it, why was Airbnb so shocked and surprised by this? I think it was because Airbnb wasn't very diverse. If most people on your leadership team have never been discriminated against, then you're not going to be really aware of the fact that discrimination is likely going on your platform because you never lived it. So I think that just getting into this understanding of the value of diverse perspectives, the self-awareness to realize that I don't have all the answers, I think has been really valuable for me.
I love that. So curious about, you started in law. I'm just curious about, how do you pivot into, become like the chief ethic officer? Like what's the difference between general counsel to the chief ethic officer?
You know what? I think they're very related. Your job as a general counsel is to identify risk for a company and try to manage those risks. When I was general counsel of Airbnb, I started looking around and I saw Me Too as a movement. I saw what was going on at Uber. I saw companies increasingly getting called out for bad behavior by their leaders and by the company itself. And it just struck me, look, I want to learn from their mistakes. It's always better to learn from other people's mistakes. So what can I do to prevent these problems? Because if I can drive integrity into the culture of the company, it's going to make my job as general counsel a lot easier. Because who deals with these problems? Well, the general counsel's got to deal with the fallout. So I think that you don't need a chief ethics officer at a company to be ethical. I think it needs to be something that's embraced by leadership. General counsel is a good place. Head of HR is a good place. Look, CEO's got to be a good place. You want leaders thinking like chief ethics officers. And I think that the more leaders are thinking like chief ethics officers, the better you can propel your brand and protect it against risk. So I think it's actually a pretty natural progression.
I like what you said about, like starting from the top as like, the leader have to be some sort of like, leading the company towards like being an ethical company. Just curious, sometimes as a younger person, when I apply a job, if like, what's a ethics situation of this company? Because if it's a startup, like no one have ever heard about this, as a younger person, if I starting a company, I probably don't have a lot of resources to compete with, with a company like Airbnb to make sure that I hire the best employee that with the best ethics. I only have two choices who, maybe like who can just do the job, but I don't really know if they would, lead the company to an ethical situation. So curious, as a young person, what can we do to kind of make sure that we're either, like joining a good company or like, how should we navigate the work situation when it comes to like a difficult point that, we don't agree with what the company wants to do, but we also don't have much choices to, switch around?
Yeah, there's a lot of information out there about companies that didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Look, when I was growing up, and you had no way to learn about companies. You could read the newspaper. My parents had Encyclopedia Britannica in their bedroom, and you could go pull that off. I'm serious. That was about it. Today, there's so much information available at your fingertips. There's websites like Glassdoor and Blind. The internet, if you do your research, you can start to get a sense about what a company really stands for, what they believe in. You can reach out through LinkedIn and find people that used to work at companies, and they'll tell you what's going on. They'll tell you what the way people act. You can read now. You've got so much information. Just Google a company. Go read. Do they have a sustainability report? Are the leaders talking constantly about the financials, or are they also talking about a broader obligation? So I think it's a matter of do your homework. You can read so much and talk to so many people now and connect with people in ways you couldn't in the past. Find out what really matters in a company. It's out there.
In terms of you work at so many different tech companies like eBay or Airbnb or Chegg. What do you see as maybe like some theme that around these companies are what are some biggest challenge, maybe the top 3 challenges that you're facing that you feel like it needed to be solved?
I think one big question is, what is the obligation of a company to communities in the world? So, to what extent do companies like eBay and Airbnb have an obligation to communities? I think, I know Airbnb specifically says that communities are stakeholders. So they're taking on problems like discrimination as their problem. They're taking on party houses, disruptions to communities as their problem. What about environment? What about carbon? Look at Etsy. Etsy's, an online marketplace. Now, Etsy's contributions to climate change are probably pretty minimal directly because they're just a platform. But their sellers are shipping a lot of goods. And so Etsy actually partnered with another company, 3 Degrees, a B Corp. Etsy was determined to be carbon neutral. So Etsy is actually now, as a platform, invested in, I believe, wind farms and solar farms through 3 Degrees that make their platform carbon neutral. They just have taken on that responsibility to the world, which I love. And by the way, it's actually, when they put it on their website and in checkout, their business went up. They actually now are more successful as a business because they're taking on these third-party obligations. So I think a big one for companies is, stepping up and recognizing that you've got obligations to a broader world. Black Lives Matter. What are your obligations to your customers and your employees around a diverse workforce, or ensuring that you're serving all customers? So I think every company has to identify what's your North Star, what's your mission, what's your purpose for it. You've got to have a reason to exist that is more than profit. You've got to identify your purpose in the world. And once you've done that, identify who your stakeholders are. And through that, start measuring whether you are successfully serving those stakeholders. And in doing that, if you start recognizing an obligation to something broader than profit, I think you start to hit at some of the things that we recognize as being a quote unquote good company, or an ethical or purposeful company.
I feel like you have a lot of really fun stories in your book about, from, when eBay just started, you actually, went to go talk to the person who created the law to, prevent people from selling darts or like that kind of toy that's kind of dangerous for people. I think there are a lot of really super interesting stories. Like, what do you see as maybe so in terms of Airbnb or eBay, or Chegg, what would be maybe, can you share 1 or 2 interesting stories that you find the most maybe defining moment for the company to, to make a decision to, create a conscious ethic choice?
Sure. Well, I'll pick, let's take discrimination on Airbnb. When I'd only been at the company about a month as the general counsel, when we started getting reports that some hosts were discriminating against Black guests.
Mm-hmm.
And Black guests were having trouble finding a place to stay on Airbnb.
Mm-hmm.
And it got momentum. I mean, it was a hashtag, Airbnb while Black.
Mm-hmm.
And the press picked it up, stories started multiplying, and we started getting even a couple of lawsuits, class actions about it. And I remember, as the general counsel, I went off and did my research, right? What is the obligation of a platform like Airbnb when some of its hosts are discriminating? In fact, does the discrimination laws even apply to short-term rentals like that? And I went in to meet with Brian Chesnut, the founder, CEO of Airbnb. And I started to go through with him what the law was. He held up his hand and he said, "Stop, I don't care." Like, well, what do you mean you don't care? And he said, Airbnb's mission is about connecting people, particularly people from different backgrounds and different cultures through immersive travel. If this sort of discrimination is going on our platform, we're failing as a company. We're not succeeding in our mission. So he says, I don't care what the law is, we're going to fix it. And that really enabled Airbnb to take a really different approach. I went out and met with the people that were suing us and said, hey, you know what? I agree with you. Why don't we work together? Because if you really care about fighting discrimination online, we're going to do anything that makes sense. And that's what we did. And I think that it probably cost Airbnb some business in the short run in terms of some changes we made to the platform. But in the long run, doing the right thing, I think is actually great for Airbnb, great for its brand. And it was great to be able to do the right thing in the world.
I love that. So I like that, Airbnb taking, they're really looking at the long term, what would be the beneficial things to do for the company and then establish a brand image that's really, like inclusive. So curious on, for example, as a startup founder or, people who just started their career, like how should we kind of creating these culture? Because at the beginning, maybe it costs a lot of money. For example, I remember you mentioned a case about, so basically some guests sort of destroyed a host's place and then Airbnb sort of gave the reimbursement for the host to prevent that kind of things from happening or to, giving people some sort of like, leverage to if something like that happened, then there will be a reimbursement. So curious, but if it's a startup, like, we may not really have that much resources, like how should we kind of creating a culture like this?
I don't think it actually costs that much to be ethical. I actually think it costs a lot more to be unethical. I mean, I'll give you an example. The situation you referred to early in Airbnb's history, a host had their apartment trashed. I mean, it was ugly. I mean, some guest had destroyed the place, stolen items, just malicious. And back in those days, there was, Airbnb was sympathetic, but it didn't do anything. It didn't have any policies or doing anything. And I think they were, Airbnb wanted to do something to help, but felt kind of powerless. Like, we didn't do it. Right? We're just a platform. And the host went online, EJ, and was really pushed. Was really upset, as we all understood. And Brian, I think, really agonized over the right thing to do. And finally, I think he, things kept getting worse and worse. And he finally decided, you know what, how do I want to be remembered? And he said, you know what, we've got to start offering some sort of reimbursement for these situations. And I remember he went to the board and proposed $5,000 of insurance for a host, which was a lot of money for a small company, right? But the board's response was add a zero. And in fact, not only did they add a zero, they added another zero and then more, and now it's $1 million. So you're saying, well, we're small and we can't afford it. You can't afford not to. And in fact, by creating a program, a reimbursement program like that, it actually drove the business more because it gave hosts more confidence that, oh, I can do this because if I rent on Airbnb and something goes wrong, the company's got my back. And it actually ended up costing the company a lot less than they feared and actually drove a lot more business. Net, it was positive. But you kind of walk your way into it, right? eBay did the same thing. I remember eBay's first buyer protection program. I mean, now you think of buyer protection as, oh yeah, if I pay for the item and I don't get it, the company reimburses me, right? That seems normal. That wasn't the way it was in the early days of the internet. eBay's first buyer protection program, because they were nervous, $200 maximum with a $25 deductible, right? The average price of an item on eBay at that time was $40. So that was really not going out on a limb very much, right? But you go into it incrementally. You test it. We went out with that. It didn't cost a whole lot. It drove more buyer confidence. So then you can eliminate the deductible. Then you can go up to $1,000. Then you buy PayPal. Then you can control the money, and then you can, you can do it all. So I think the answer is walk your way into it, but trust that the more you can do to be there and do the right thing, the more the world rewards you and will trust you.
You know, the more good things you do, the less you will be losing in the long term. I love that. So you have done these really, you are the chief ethic officer of Airbnb, and then you were on board of so many, or advising for so many really great companies. Just, after after Airbnb, so you wrote this book during Airbnb, I assume. So curious, what's your goal for the book? Was that, I'm sure you wanted to make sure that every person in companies, be mindful about the ethic situation, and then having a moral compass. Curious, first of all, what's your goal for the book? And the second about what are some actions that you feel, a company or what do you think people's actions should be after this book?
Well, I mean, I think any author would love to see their book at the top of all the bestseller lists, and a ride at Disneyland, right? But realistically, the goal is to get people in business to think about how to drive integrity into the culture of their own company, how to act ethically, and thus even enhance the business to drive even more business. I'm very concerned about climate change. I want businesses to be thinking about what's their role and what can they do to help, drive their carbon emissions down. What can we do so that we stop this ridiculous cycle of executives using their power for sex and ruining people's lives that way? So I think it's I think most authors, you want to have impact. So you want people to you want to start the conversation around more integrity in the corporate world, and so that's what I'm after. The book is a great way to at scale get your message out there. So I'd love to see a lot of people buy the book and read it, because I think that's the starting point.
Absolutely. So let's talk about how you created the book. So there are a lot of amazing examples. You chatted with a lot of really high profile people, as well as a lot of, people from different stages in their career. So I love how the book is conducted, and curious on, can you tell us more about the book creation? How did you come up with the framework, and how, you have so many different examples, how do you collect these examples, and, tell us about more on how did you create the book?
If my philosophy in life is, you need diverse perspectives and diverse points of view. You don't have all the answers. Then I had to practice that in writing the book, right? I don't have all the answers around integrity. So I sort of went on a bit of a learning journey. I think the initially it was, I've got all these great learnings from Airbnb that I want to share with the world. But I think in order to do it right, I recognized that I needed to get other people to weigh in on how they looked at integrity in the workplace. So I went out and talked to people like Adam Silver, commissioner of the NBA. I really admire him as a leader. I talked to the founder of Costco. I talked to Eric Holder, a former Attorney General of the United States who I really respected how he ran the Justice Department when he was there. Ben Horowitz. Carlos Santana actually speaks quite a bit about integrity, and I spent some time with him. The science of integrity. Dan Ariely is a behavioral scientist at Duke. And it actually kind of surprised me that when I went out and talked to Dan Ariely, there was actually some science behind some of the things that I was doing at Airbnb. Quite accidentally, I had stumbled on some things that actually had some scientific backing. I think there was I started the process thinking that I was going to share with the world what I learned. But I think in doing so, I went on a journey that I learned quite a bit about integrity in the process of writing the book. But look, it was a long process. The book took over a year to write it. But it was a great learning journey in the process of doing it.
So I think like that's quite interesting, and that you got so many different perspectives from people from different walk of lives. And so when you were having conversation with them, like I'm just out of curiosity on like how do you even start the conversation like ethics, because it's so not talked about. Like I really do think you make ethics sounds really cool in this book.
Yeah, Brian said that to me. Brian looked at me one day and said, "You've actually made ethics cool," and I didn't think that was possible. But I think it's not that hard, because people are uncomfortable talking about integrity because I think they feel like it's too personal or moral and you're trying to impose your values on somebody else. Yeah, I don't look at it that way. I actually think that the world presents you with a lot of really interesting integrity related dilemmas or questions all the time. And let's get over the discomfort. I think so many people are uncomfortable in part because they feel like, oh, well, they're worried somebody's going to say, well, who are you? Tell me about integrity. Look, I know you've done this. I kind of look at it with we're not perfect. I'm certainly not perfect. And so there's a disclaimer right at the beginning is that I have no right to write this book because I'm any more ethical than anybody else. I think what gives me the perspective isn't my quote unquote high integrity. It's more that I've thought about it and been willing to actually talk about it. And I think once you get over that discomfort, it's actually a really interesting subject. And a lot of people want to talk about it because once you start the conversation and you realize you're not setting them up to make them sound like they're perfect. We're just people trying to work through doing the right thing. People are willing to talk about it because they realize, I think, ultimately, like, wow, you're right. We shouldn't be uncomfortable with this subject. And in fact, the more we get over the discomfort and the more we talk about it, the more I think we are, really encouraging good behavior. Ambiguity and silence are enemies of integrity. Dan Ariely taught me that. So let's get over the discomfort. Let's talk about it. And in doing so, I think just the conversation encourages better behavior.
I love that you sort of like spark the conversation to, to make people feel comfortable about talking about the ethic issues. So, I know that you built sort of like a program in Airbnb to encourage employees to talk about, to talk to people on their team or, there's like an ethic group within the Airbnb organization. Tell us more about, as a company, how can they, create a program similar to that to make sure that employees can have someone to talk about.
Well, it has to start at the top. If the CEO and the leadership aren't committed to running a business with integrity, then you're lost. Because look, they're going to set the tone. I say that a CEO is the thermostat for integrity, not a thermometer. A thermometer takes the temperature in the room, but a thermostat sets it. And depending on how the CEO and leadership act, that creates the environment for everybody in the company and how they're going to act. If your CEO is saying things like, we need to hit this sales number no matter what, don't come back to me and tell me you've missed it. Right? Well, that sends one message. That almost sends a message of cut corners. It gives you implicit permission to do whatever it takes. if a CEO is meeting with the CFO every quarter and saying, we're going over these numbers. If there's anything at all that makes you uncomfortable with these numbers, I want you to tell me. We're not going to jail. We're going to do things the right way. Now that sets a very different tone on the thermostat. So I think start with leadership, and then if leaders are bought in, then I think it's a matter of, you don't need a chief ethics officer to be ethical. What you need is, like at Airbnb, we had 6,000 plus employees. I wanted 6,000 chief ethics officers. I wanted people to feel like it was theirs, to feel like they owned it, that they were comfortable raising their hand and asking a question. And if you can do that, you can create this environment. Dan Ariely talks about creating an environment where integrity is just talked about. And that makes a huge difference. He does an experiment, this math experiment I talk about in the book, where he hands out math problems to everybody in the room and says, all right, do the problems. I'm not going to give you enough time to finish. When I say stop, put your pencil down. So he hands out the paper, people do the problems. He says stop, they stop. And then one by one, he has them come up to the front of the room and put their piece of paper and shred their math problems. And then as they leave the room, they tell the proctor how many problems they did. And the proctor gives them $1 for every problem that they say they did. Now, what Dan doesn't tell them is that he's modified the shredder. The shredder only shreds the outer edge of the piece of paper. So he knows exactly how many problems they had done. So the question is, how many people tell the truth to the proctor when they're getting their money? And how many people lie? 70% of people lie. Now, most of them don't lie by a lot. They fudge a little bit. You know what? People will always look at a situation in their own self-interest. We all think we've got integrity, but we'll fudge to our own benefit a little bit, right? As long as we can rationalize, as long as we can still tell ourselves that we're a good person. So Dan will do the same problem again, but this time he'll ask everybody, before you start doing the math problems, write as many of the 10 commandments down at the top of the piece of paper as you can. So what does he learn with this? Well, number one, he learns that no one knows all the 10 of the 10 commandments. In fact, most people can only name a few. But just the act of putting that in their mind and putting that frame of reference, when he does that at the beginning of the exercise, guess what? Cheating virtually disappears. So creating this environment around everybody writing the 10 commandments down. Here's another one, the British revenue authorities. They're charged with collecting people's taxes. And they're trying to collect taxes from people who haven't paid. So they're delinquent. They send out a letter, right, to get everybody to pay. They add one sentence to the letter, and it increases the tax collection by 20 basis points, by 20 percentage points. Big increase. What do you think that one sentence is? Now, I would have thought the sentence is something threatening, right? Like failure to pay taxes can lead to a seizure of your assets, garnishment of wages, and the like. No, that's not what it is. The one sentence was 9 out of 10 Britons pay their taxes on time. So what they've done, adding that one sentence, bumped the collection rate up significantly. And it's making people understand that what they're doing is out of step with everybody else, because everybody wants to feel good about themselves. So creating this environment where people feel that others around them are doing the right thing, reminding people of their better selves, that actually plays a big role in integrity. So if you can create that environment, move that thermostat, reminding people of their better selves, it can make a big difference in a company.
I love that story. When I hear the story in your book, I definitely like the one that about cheating on can the 70% people tell the truth, one really resonated with me actually. I feel like, I feel like it really makes sense. People want to lie a little, not like a lot, but unless like they can justify, which really brings the point of like, there is different thermostat like in different companies and in different like people really view different things different ways, and if they can, I feel like it's really necessary to kind of create like a measurement and then to guide them to like to a better direction.
I understand that rationalizing process. People will, if they can rationalize their behavior. Another example of what I didn't put this one in the book, but something that Dan does is he'll take a vending machine, like a Coke machine, and put a sign, a big sticker that basically says, if this machine malfunctions, call this number, this 800 number, right? And then he rigs the vending machine so that when you put your money into it, the soda comes out, but your money comes back too. You get your money back. So you're getting free sodas. And then they watch the vending machine to see how many people call the number to report the vending machine being out of order. How many people call that number? Nobody calls that number. People stay at the machine, and when they realize they're getting free sodas, many of them take 3 and 4. Now, why? Well, I think because a lot of people feel like, oh, I've been ripped off by vending machines in the past, right? Or, wow, they charge so much money in these vending machines. So they feel like they can still feel like they're a good person and take 3 or 4 sodas. You've got to get to this world where in a company where people feel as though other people are acting with integrity, that integrity is valued and rewarded, and people are reminded of their better selves. Boy, when you can do that, then I think you're really on a path to running a high integrity company.
So I think like you have a really great guideline. I feel like, if you already questioning these things, you really have to, think about it. I feel like you have a good like moral compass on ethics in general. So you mentioned about, your mom sort of like returned the money to the grocery store person. That like remind me of like the vending machine story. So who do you look up to for guideline on these ethical things? Because I think it's really hard to navigate like what is right or wrong besides like, asking your parents. Who do you kind of look up to in your career on this in this category?
Yeah, my mom. I think parents have a big role here. My mom taught me when I was really young and had a big influence on me. And I think I don't look at it like who do I look up to, because I think I've got to have my own moral compass. But what it is really important to do is, some things are easy. Lying, cheating, stealing, we can all agree that's easy. Those things are unethical. But a lot of times these ethical issues are complicated. They can be gray. And they can be, a reasonable minds can disagree. And what I've learned is I don't look up to someone, but I look to different, diverse perspectives. So at Airbnb, for example, we have a group of ethics advisors. Because I shouldn't be like Moses with the 10 commandments telling everybody I have all the answers, because I don't have all the answers. I'm biased. I'm biased. I have a particular point of view that was created, I think, through a lifetime of upbringing, socioeconomic background, and experiences, which means that my perspective isn't the only perspective. So we have a group at Airbnb of about 30 ethics advisors. And they are intentionally a very diverse group, both race, gender, nationality, even what they do for a living. People in marketing may have a very different perspective than someone in engineering or finance about what's ethical. So what I figured out is that by listening to a number of different people's perspectives on a particular ethical situation, I learn a lot. And so I think it's, being open and self-aware enough to realize that I don't have all the answers, and that coming to the right answer for a company really should involve a process where you listen to diverse perspectives.
all the stories in your book really, it's not really obvious. A lot of them are not really obvious. Like, are they like ethical or not ethical? And like, I remember, you were mentioning about like one sister is in one city, one sister is in another city. So basically they're selling some sort of like sports hat or like sweatshirt or something. And then that person sort of like sending a client list to the sister. Like, is that correct? They're not even in the same city, right? So they're not really direct competitors. The sister is like a one person shop, and then like the other sister is working for like a big company, right? So, is that right or wrong? Like, I mean, I know it's wrong, but on the other hand, like, how do you prevent these things from happening? I feel like you can't really tell, like, there's no evidence on that, right? Like, she sent like an envelope unless the sister was just like reporting it. It's really hard to tell. And like, I feel like that's just like one extreme example. There are a lot of different things. Like, are you going to take, a pen from like your company to give it to, people, your roommates or whatever? So I feel like those are just things that like, it really made people think. It's not really like something that I will have like a clear answer on if it is correct or not, but it does make me think about questioning about like what I was doing. I feel like it's a great book.
That's neat. Yeah, the goal is to make you think, because in the moment, we all give ourselves the benefit of the doubt. Right? We all do the thing that's in our self-interest, but looking at it from the outside, it may look quite different. So I think it's just important to add that ethical frame to our life, just like hopefully we add it to our business dealings. And I think that will, I think it can lead to a more ethical world.
So, speaking of like, in the current situation, we're all quarantining, like in the future, I know that like there are a lot of big tech companies announced that they're going to have people to work from home and forever, right? So it's really hard to come up with like a culture if people are not really sitting in the same office. If like, that's a future, like, maybe have people working from home, how would you expect people to, create like a ethic framework for themselves or for the company they work at?
You're going to have to more aggressively communicate. I think leaders, times like this require leaders to communicate often. Like Brian at Airbnb still does a Thursday employee meeting, all employee 1 hour every week with Brian, where employees can submit questions in advance or ask them live. And I think that, when the pandemic's behind us, I think there'll be more remote work. I don't know if it will be quite as aggressively remote as people think, because I think there are a lot of advantages to being, actually in the same office, knowing each other, creating the culture. And I think that even where work is more remote, you're going to see a lot of offsites. I think you need human connection as a fundamental part of building a culture. And I think you're going to have to make sure you take time in these communications or in these offsites to talk about these things. Because you're right, it's going to be harder to create a culture when you're not all in the same building or the same space when you're working remotely.
I think it's even harder to come up with a guideline just because I'm in my 20s. Like a lot of my friends' companies, they did responding and then they're successful. And then they're running like a, 10 people team and like they only have 10 core people. And then the rest of them, they outsource everything. And I'm like, okay, so your company looks really legit on the internet, but you only have 10 employees. And like the employees also change a ton, like the offsite employees. And I feel like it's even harder to create a culture because people really, they're just like, a lot of them are freelancers or like, they're gig workers. Like they probably do like 10 different jobs. They just want to get something done. And, in that case, like, how do you, besides like, communicating a lot, like how would you kind of manage this kind of situation to make sure that people, have like a consistent like experience working at a company?
I think that's a challenge, isn't it? I mean, I don't pretend that there's a big answer other than to recognize that it's a big challenge and realize that you've got to act with intentionality to try to overcome that. I think you've got to spend time with the people that are the gig workers and let them know, look, this is the way that we operate here. And for the work that you're going to do with us, this is what we need from you. This is what we expect from you. But it is, I think the more turnover and the more gig workers you have, the harder it is to establish a culture of integrity. You have to, I think, spend extra effort to overcome that challenge.
First of all, like, I think thank you so much for like bringing this to the table as like, I like that you're, even from your book, you give a lot of really specific examples and you kind of like sort of creating this scenario for, to make people think. And I like that you have an open answer. There's no quiet answer that's like fixed, could be applying to every single situation. And I like that you're really humbling about, this is like a question that we could think of, but I like that it's not really like a textbook, we need to do A instead of B, and copying like a law document from like another company to, basically to create that. So I have 3 questions I ask every guest. One is, what's your favorite book? I know like my current favorite book is your book. So what's your favorite book?
That's great.
If it's not your book. And who made the biggest impact in your career? And who would you invite to your dinner party?
Favorite book? I'm going to go Adam Grant's Give and Take right now. I think it's a terrific book around the philosophy of how you operate your life, that even though Adam doesn't go there, I think it really goes nicely with the things I talk about in my book, because I think the companies that give will actually be more successful than companies that don't. So I'll go with Adam Grant's Give and Take. Biggest influence has got to be my mom. I think that it starts young, but I think the principles that she taught me were very powerful lessons early on that made a big difference in how I operate today. So my mom gets the nod for that one. So the dinner party. How many people do I get to invite to my dinner party?
It's your party, so.
My party? Let's see. I really admire leaders who have a lot of humility and who are, I like sports leaders in particular. So I would go with, I love the time I got to spend with Adam Silver at the NBA. And I think that what the NBA does is right in the center of so much that's going on right now with integrity, right? They're very involved in racial justice. And I think they've navigated those things really well. So, and I also like University of Virginia basketball coach Tony Bennett. I went to school at UVA, so I'm a little biased there, but his team won the national championship. Yet at the same time, his fellow college basketball coaches recognized him as being the most ethical college basketball coach in a business that has a reputation of being really tough. So how somebody becomes number one, has a national championship team while not breaking the rules of being recognized as the most ethical, to me is really, really remarkable. I'll also pick Carlos Santana. I think he's a really high integrity, very spiritual person who is a fascinating person to hang around and talk to. So I would invite those to the dinner.
If you're not at work, where can we find you? Which is like, what's your hobby beside your work?
Oh, so I've got a ranch up in Napa and love hiking and gardening up there. You'll also find me shooting baskets and hitting golf balls with my son. So I think those are, or riding my bike.
The nature things. Yeah, I love that. Everyone should totally check out your book. I absolutely love that. And yeah, thank you so much.
Grace, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.